A snapback market? What is it? The Toronto real estate market is rebounded, has come back to life. Yes, well, maybe. You see, we saw some multiple offers and crazy number of showings on listings in the Toronto area. Are mortgage interest rates coming down? Yes, these are all things we talk about with our good friend and mortgage broker, Mr. Dion Begg, right after this. Here we are, my friends, with our favorite mortgage broker in all the land, Mr. Dion Begg. How you doing?
Hey Gary, recovering after a busy weekend with children's birthday parties.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good for you. And I'll tell you what, we're recovering. I got 3, 4 layers on today. It's a cold one here in the GTA, minus 20, 25. It's nuts. But I'll tell you
I did.
what's
Yeah,
keep
sorry. I
going.
just spoke to a realtor. I spoke to a realtor in Ottawa, and she's telling me they're preparing for -30. So, be
Yeah.
happy that you're in Toronto, Gary, GTA.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll sit by the fire a little bit later today for sure. For sure. My segue was going to be what's not cold is our
Oh,
market
what's
right
not cold?
now.
Tell me, Gary, what's not cold right now?
I'm glad you asked, Dion Beg. I'm glad you asked. I take everything I'm about to say, my friends, with a grain of salt. Always peel that onion away, as we like to say. But we are starting to see an early signs of a moving market. Sales are happening, and not just any sales here in the GTA. Multiple offers on select properties in select areas. Listen to my words carefully. Uh, but we are seeing activity and these are on listings, Dion, where they were, sitting for 30, 40, 50, 60 days, some of these properties, and they're all being gobbled up on the weekend, which is interesting. As well
Mm,
as here's not only where we see multiple offers and those properties selling, we'll find out what today they sold for, but most likely over asking. And I don't think we'll see the crazy, 10, 15% over asking, but you never know. um, Here's the interesting thing. Typically when it's minus 20 out, what do people do?
yeah, they're staying home watching Netflix.
Staying home, a little hot chocolate or something, Netflix. They're not going to view properties, let alone put offers on properties. We've got reports on the weekends of people in the numbers showing up to properties, 50, 100 people through properties on a weekend in January. That doesn't typically happen until your April or your May months. So if you've been sitting on the sidelines waiting for the shoe to drop, I think we need to start having some conversations if you're a buyer out there, and of course, if you're a seller. I don't know about what kind of phone calls you're going to get over the next week, Dion, but you might have some people saying, "I just bought a property."
Yeah, well, again, it happened last week, and again, this is what we've been talking about for the longest time, Gary. In that it doesn't actually take a big interest rate shift; it's the expectation that rates are going to shift is all that people need to feel some level of confidence. The fact that the Fed's come out and said that the Canadian bond yields are down, and now we're seeing several lenders with interest rates starting with a number 4 in front of it as
Mhm.
opposed to a number 5. This is actually enough confidence for people to get back out there, and that's just perfect evidence of it. I mean, minus 20 degrees and having 50 people show up to an open house, that's anecdotal, but it's quite significant.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll preface this too. We're not seeing the multiple offers, or at least that I'm aware of. I could be wrong. On the $1.5 million properties, we're seeing them on $1 million or less, and of course that's going to drive attention. Uh, but here's the thing: if a property's listed at 950 as an example, and you're getting multiple let alone one offer, but multiple offers on that property. In one case, we had 30 offers on a property listed at 850, I believe it was. Uh, that's 30 potential buyers for a property,
Yeah, right.
right? And they'll probably, maybe half of them know that maybe the fair market value is at about 950 to 1,050,000. I'm not thereabouts. We'll call it a million. So you probably have 10, 15 buyers that are ready to purchase a home today at $1 million in that area. Uh, so that's
So
that's what
if you're a seller too,
sellers.
this is a good news for sellers, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's what sellers have been waiting for, right? We talked about this too a few weeks ago, and perhaps it's we're now seeing the evidence of it. Is those New Year's resolutions, or no, it's a new year, new beginning. Yeah, this is the month we're going to go purchase a property or put our property up for sale. Uh, we're seeing that happen
And
in
some of
real
these
time
guys
now.
have been waiting for 2 years for a sign, right? And, for many of them, the sign was the Fed coming out and saying, yes, we're going to be dropping rates at least by 75 basis points by the end of 2024. I've seen that translate to, into the bond market, people making predictions of a 1% drop in the Canadian interest rates by the end of this year. And so all of this media, which has been tilted to the negative for so long and now slowly coming back to the positive, is obviously having that positive consumer sentiment translate to consumer activity.
And I'm curious from the activity from the bank side, the lender side, do you foresee in the next little while, you've already mentioned it, you're starting to see rates start with a four, uh, that gap between the bond rate and what that overnight rate or what that
Correct.
lending rate is, that starting to
Yeah,
shrink a
yeah.
little bit?
Exactly. So last week we talked about the fact that, the gap that exists, there's always a gap, but the gap is significant between the actual 5-year bond rate versus the actual retail rate at banks. But that gap was overly inflated. It's slowly coming down. I feel like it's not quite where it should be, but probably in the next couple of weeks. And in particular, in the spring market, if the banks start to get competitive with each other like they normally do, then that gap will probably be reduced further, and we'll have more and more lenders, in that lower price point. When you're seeing these rates, Gary, at 4.99, for example, just to be clear, they are insured rates for people who are generally putting down less than 20%, generally first-time home buyers. If you're putting down more than 20%, then generally that number is still starting with a five. Whereas, last year was starting with a six. We're in the sort of the low fives, five and a quarter right now.
Yeah, which sounds so backwards to me. You put more money down, which means the bank has less exposure, but they want that insurability. They want that I don't know, support, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that another time. That'll take a
Yeah.
half an hour to explain.
That's true. That's true. That's
Yeah,
true. Okay. Okay. So snap back market. Snapback sounds such like a knee jerk reaction. I wish there was something a little bit softer because I think that's where we are. We're not quite in that snapback yet. We're just, I don't, we'll come up with some new term. I don't know.
sure.
I don't know. In my sleep, I'll come up with something. Okay. So let's talk about some of the things that happened over the last week, and one of those is in Toronto here. The property tax shot up over 10%, and you might say to yourself, "That's so much," but is it really, Dion?
Well, 10% sounds significant. I mean, it'd be nice to get a 10% pay rise, wouldn't it?
Yes, yes, thank you.
That's significant.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good way to
But
look
how does
at it.
10% impact the average Toronto home?
Well, what and I'm not taking this data off the top of my head. John Pizzalis, a fellow realtor colleague in the Toronto area, he was posting some information. You can go read it. It really is not that big of a jump. We're talking, anywhere from four to about $600 a year on these, $1.5 million properties at the very least, right? The average price in Toronto is much, in some areas is double that, triple that, in fact. So we're talking
Well, yeah,
not
I live
much at
in I
all.
live in Durham region. My principal residence is in Durham region, and I know for a fact I pay nearly double what the exact, well, a similar type home would be just on the other side of the Rouge Valley in Ontario, in Toronto. So I'm not crying too much for my Toronto neighbors. Sure, it is telling of the times when we have to jump by that amount in one year. But I think it is reflective of the fact that the people who at least have owned for several years they certainly should have the financial capacity to deal with that. But that stacked on top of increase in interest rates and therefore mortgage payments, it certainly feels like it's piling on for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. And it's the big picture is, well, not only are the individual residents of Toronto obviously either taking on more debt or having more expenses, but so does the city of Toronto. So does any city, wherever you live, Pickering, Stouffville, right? Everything has gone up in price, but Toronto still has a long way to go to catch up to kind of the GTA average of what property taxes are. So, my friends, um, yes, little annoying if you live in Toronto, but for those outsiders, yeah, welcome. Actually, that's not even a welcome yet. You're not even there yet. So, anyways, that's the reality of it. And I don't think you're going to maybe one in every thousand will sell because of this individual tax hike. I can't imagine that being a huge
Yeah, I couldn't
impact.
imagine selling for $600 a year. $50 a month, I don't think that's enough to push
Yeah,
people over the edge personally.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But I
exactly.
also just want to clarify, Gary, for the listeners, that this is the annual property tax. It is not the land transfer tax. The land transfer tax numbers have remained the same. It is your annual property tax. And it might be worthwhile just to spend a minute talking about land transfer tax, Gary, because it is actually different in Toronto than outside the GTA as well, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
outside the core of Toronto.
That's right. That's right. And so outside the core, we have one land transfer tax that goes to the Ontario government and
Province.
in
Yep.
the province. That's right. And in the Toronto city or everywhere that encompasses, not only is there the Ontario land transfer tax, but you've got the Toronto land transfer tax, which is at about
Double.
equal, the same amount, for lack of a better term, the easy math. It's about equal. I don't want to scare people, especially in the York region area, but there has been conversation from York region leaders that they may look to implement this in the near future. Near future
Wow.
being, I don't think it'll be this year. It might be a roll in. So they announce it perhaps this year for in a 2 year cycle. I don't know. But if you're in York region, just be aware of that. And I'm sure we'll get due notice on that. But
Mm,
it is a way for we when this happened in Toronto, I can't remember how many years ago, approximately 10 years ago,
right.
everyone thought that it would slow the market down, and it did
Yeah,
ever
yeah.
slow slightly. We saw a bump into our areas, Durham, Mississauga, or Peel, York, uh, but for the most part, things kept moving on. Right? It became the new norm. Yeah.
Yeah, I will tell you that sometimes we do have conversations with clients who are considering buying on that edge. Let's say they're looking at East York or Scarborough versus Pickering and Whitby. And sometimes, they'll weigh it up and they'll say, well, you know what, there's more land transfer tax in Toronto, but there's more annualized property tax in Durham. And so they sort of weigh it up. And, sometimes they push one side versus the other based on the land transfer tax issue. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if others did the same. Well, the reality is that GTA consumer doesn't have much choice, do they? I mean, you could
Yeah.
live in York, or you could live in Peel, or you could live in York, or you could live in Durham. But York's a pretty damn big area.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Mm.
is. It is. Okay. Talk to us a little bit about one of your experiences and clients. And I found it interesting as you were explaining it to me off camera, uh,
Oh yeah.
where someone's buyability is at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great example, right? A simple example. We've got a client. He's a TTC driver. He makes close to $100,000 a year. And last year, he contacted us because he wanted to sell his property for $750,000. He would have 400 clear cash. That would be down payment on his next property. And so we did the math, and based on, sorry, it was less than that, it was 300,000. And based on the math, the land transfer tax, factoring that in as well, he really wasn't able to upsize. So basically, he was selling for 750 and then buying for 750. That was kind of the math for him last year. And the reason for that, Gary, is because the stress test last year was up in the eights, close to 9% for the product that he wanted. Now, just last week, we re-engaged with him, and the interest rates have come down. Stress test has come down, and whereas last year he would have only been able to buy for around 750, this year he's looking up right now already closer to the 850 number. And if things continue as we've just discussed, where the interest rates continue to slide down, then he might be able to buy for over 900,000. So it was interesting just from a mathematics perspective to see that, how much these interest rates have impacted, and the fact that this year he might be able to go and upsize his home to the type of home that his family now needs, whereas last year really he was kind of held captive in position, because he just couldn't, it didn't make sense to sell and buy the exact same priced property, right? Whereas that's going to change this year. So I
Yeah.
feel like maybe those people who went to those open houses this past weekend have done the same math, and said, "Oh, you know what? Last year we couldn't, but this year we can."
Well, that's exactly where my mind went to, this as you're sharing that story. That's gonna have a huge impact on a lot of buyers,
Yeah. So
right?
many people have felt stuck in place. You know, the young couple who had their first child and they live in the condo that they bought when they were a childless couple, wanted to upsize and they couldn't afford it. Right? They couldn't make that happen. But now maybe this year they can financially.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I'm sure if you're sitting there as a buyer and you haven't talked with a mortgage broker of in recent lately is
Mhm.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Here's a prime example of why you need to, because your mindset might be, well, we 8 months ago we had our $1 million limit as an example. Well, now that might be a little bit higher, or you might have more options. So reach out to Dion and his team, because
Correct.
there's a conversation there that has to happen.
And I'll say just on the market side, Gary, on in that, that let's say it was $1 million property. If we continue to have 50 people showing up to open houses, 30 offers on a property, then that $1 million property won't sell for 1 million either. It'll actually
Exactly.
sell for more. So now we're back into this other vicious cycle. I always just say, if you're interested in purchasing in the next 6 to 12 months, get qualified now, so that if and when the market moves, you're not waiting and missing a cheaper price because you weren't organized, right? So
Yeah.
I can't tell you, we've got so many clients who we have in this waiting for offers situation where they're pre-approved, they're waiting to put in an offer, they're just looking for those properties, and we're touching base with them to let them know as the market changes, their price points can actually change as well.
Well, and what careful what we're saying here too, or how we're not saying the market's rebounded and come back. In very select and in few little pockets of areas, that entry level home for sure. Um, but last week, Dion, almost verbatim, you said the exact same thing. 5 6 days later,
Mm,
look, some of those circumstances are already changing. So if
yeah,
that's how fast sometimes things can move on us, especially if we see a property that we love. We're like, yeah, this is the one. And the next thing you know, you're in competition. You haven't done that homework yet. We
yeah,
always know what it's like to go into an exam or something non-prepared. Uh,
yep.
Kind of the same scenario, right? So
No, that's
reach
it.
out to
That's it.
Dion.
Get
Yeah.
prepared.
Yeah.
Get prepared, and then be ready to make your offer. Work with a competent realtor who's watching that market closely and can tell you what is going on neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street. I know that you do that, Gary. I know that your team does.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And even you could see it leading up to the weekend. I was making some phone calls to some of my colleagues at other brokerages, just checking in, see how they're doing, as well as asking them what are they seeing in the market, in some of the different areas. And wouldn't you know it, that yeah, Gary, like we've had listings sitting for 60 to 90
Mm,
days, and we're selling them this week. So
yeah,
so things are starting to happen, which means that'll make room for the new inventory that's coming onto market. And I know a lot of our agents have inventory, not sitting there, but just people are painting the basement, painting the bathroom, getting it ready to
mm,
come to market. So we will see a new influx of inventory, and so watch out for that, for sure, for sure. My friend, we were going to talk about different insurance types, but we're going to hold
next
that
week.
to next
Yeah,
next call, because that's an important conversation.
for sure.
Remind us how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, so kangamortgage.ca, or reach out to me on Instagram at the Dion Beg.
There you go. The Dion Beg over here. That's where he is. That's where it is. And of course, I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next episode. Goodbye for now.